guys, Anne-Marie here. Today I am sharing my first junk journal process video. I had a rough idea in my head for what I wanted to try for this double page spread, but some of these ideas kind of popped up along the way. So let's jump in. First, I pawed through my ephemera envelopes. These are the envelopes that I organized in this video here, and they include a lot of magazine pictures that I've collected over the years. So I knew I'd have some fall color picks, and that's what I'm looking for. I found 3, and I chose which one I thought would fit the spread the best. While I was digging through all that, this coffee cup wrap and this free sample sticker from a label company that I got in the mail also caught my eye, so I pulled those out. I decided to rip the edges instead of cutting anything out cleanly with scissors. I knew I wanted to do a black speckled border around the photo, which I'll get to in a minute, but as I was looking for paint or Sharpies to use for that, I saw this big old roll of transparent tape, and I thought, ooh, I've always wanted to try a water image transfer. And especially with a magazine picture, the stakes just felt lower, if it didn't work. And since I knew I had the other fall pics as backup, I just went for it. Tape water transfers are super easy. So first you just place clear tape directly over top of the picture you want to use. You can trim it up close to the edge or not at all, or leave a border. If you leave some sort of border where there's no picture or paper on the other side of the tape, it will still be a little sticky when we're done. So just take that into account if it matters for your project. Next, you submerge the picture on the tape in the water. I used warm water in part because it just made sense to me somehow that warm water would permeate the paper more easily, but also I was going to stick my fingers in there. So I was already freezing from a walk we took that evening, and I did not need to make it worse. In the close-up, you can kind of see the heat like crawling up the sides of the Tupperware container. Thought that looked cool. What you're looking at here is the wrong side up. So my autumn pick is facing down and the tape is down. So this is kind of like the back side of it. And I was kind of just waiting and watching to see the water saturated evenly. So I ended up leaving it there for about 10 minutes. So then the last step of the transfer process is to remove all of the paper. Every last bit, all the lint, any extra bits or layers that are still sticking, you just rub it with your fingers and it comes off, and you're left with the image transferred clearly onto the tape. The paper came off really easily. I did have to resubmerge it sometimes to kind of like rinse it off. Eventually I dumped the water I started with and I just finished with running water in the sink. And it left me with this very cool transparent picture. The colors are now kind of muted a bit since it's see-through, so you're seeing everything else behind it. And the transfer isn't perfect. For example, there's like a spot that didn't transfer, or maybe I scratched it off. I don't know. But at any rate, I loved this effect. It's kind of vintage, kind of imperfect, muted. And since the pick in this instance, it's really just to set the scene, provide a little bit of context or imagery. It's not the actual subject of the spread. So I thought that it worked nicely, that it was receding a bit into the background. Next, I wanted some fallen leaves scattered around. So originally I was going to lean a little scrapbooky on this, and I was planning on using a bunch of leaf dies and some pattern paper scraps. But since I'd run across the corrugated cardboard wrap, I decided to instead wing it with some messy, more mixed media hand-cut leaves instead. So first, I chopped up the wrap into as many simple leaf shapes as I could, somewhere between 15 to 20. Next, I used a variety of distress inks to color the leaves, using my ink blending brushes. And to dress them up a little, I added some splatters of metallic and brown mists. I did smush another coffee wrapper and the leftover ink on the splat mat because waste not, want not, right? All right, so while those dried, I cut out my title letters. I just wanted tall, skinny, capital letters. I used the same dictionary paper that you can see on the right hand of the background, and I liked how that brought the dictionary pattern over to the left of the spread to kind of unify it. I did a little mock-up of the plan so far. I decided instead of just a cluster of leaves on the upper right, I'd rather have an actual tree there. So I started thinking about how I could do that while I was sticking things down. I did want to outline the title letters against that security envelope background that I used on the left. Even with the gesso, it just felt like it needed a little more separation. So I traced around the letters with a fine tip Sharpie. I did have to stop every once in a while and kind of scribble off on a clean or plain piece of ungessoed paper. It's like the gesso left a residue and that would rub into the Sharpie tip. So I just had to kind of wipe it off and draw with it a little bit on unpainted paper to get the ink flowing again. Now this is the part I had seen clearly in my head, but it did not start out the way I envisioned. Even though I used a Sharpie, the ink was kind of wiping up off the tape. Like as I would draw with it, it would wipe up some of the previous ink I'd laid down. And I was getting a little frustrated, and I was doing these little circles to try to color it quickly, and it looked goofy, but I stuck with it. I tweaked it as I went a little bit and just tried to trust the process, and it did work out in the end. I was able to create kind of the solid black surrounding the picture, and then the picture's kind of emerging from that. So with the speckles kind of receding into the background and into the border or into the picture itself. Essentially, I colored in a thick black border from the edge of the picture across that clear tape border that I left to the edges of the background all around. And then I speckled it out. So I reduced the frequency and density of the speckles as I moved away from the border, both moving into the middle of the picture and out away from the picture. And when I was happy with that border, I moved on to my leaf clusters. This is the flap of the paper bag that was used to make the base of this album. I did choose to keep the flap, flappy. So I had to be careful where I glued the leaves because that can still close. And this is where I'm going to draw the tree on the other side. So this was another example of trust the process, this tree, because this thing looks all kinds of awful for a long time, but also it's another time where when I did finally finish it, I did a lot of work that I ended up just covering up with the cardboard leaves, but I'm glad I did it for no other reason than I need more practice at getting better at putting what's in my head down on the paper. So it isn't perfect, but it looks a lot better than where it started. And of course, now it's time to cover it up. So I did have to make some more leaves. So I used the coffee wrap that I'd already smushed in the leftover ink from earlier to make a bunch more. And I glued those down to make my little tree. Then it was time to journal. So I just started writing straight on the background. I wrote into just every little nook and cranny that I could find. I loosely was trying to do a left to right, moving down across the page like you typically see with text, but there were times when I just went straight down for a while, like hold down a whole margin, or where I jogged back up and over to fill in a gap. A big part of that is because this was really more just about getting it out. I don't need to refer to this later. I don't need to accurately read these words again. This, frankly, isn't journaling that I necessarily want to read again or relive. And I don't really want it to be legible to other people either. It's really just about kind of vomiting the words on the page, taking these ugly words and turning them into something somewhat beautiful or at least attractive or acceptable, I guess, by basically turning that text into the background of the spread. I just really liked that idea of journaling in the moment, getting the thoughts and the feelings out, and not having to worry about preserving them for the future. These words aren't for an audience. Instead, they're part of the art creating process. And I've actually thought of a few other ways that I can do that, to get those words on paper, to incorporate them into my art, just to take whatever pain or passion or feeling is there and turn that into something visual. Not necessarily coherent thoughts that I have to read again, because I don't want to revisit it or rehash it. I already do that enough in my head. I don't need it in my journals, at least not anymore. So that's the finished spread. That flap affords me a little privacy as well, because generally that book will lay open with the flap laid flat, so that tree will be what's seen, and it'll cover about half of the journaling. Here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please click the subscribe button. I'm still working on my last set of vintage paper embellishment tutorials, as well as a process video about my video process, actually. So I'll see you then. And in the meantime, I hope you have a happy, scrappy week. Also, please go back and look at my previous video. It's actually not my video. My daughter made it, showing off some miniature books that she made. And I know that she would appreciate your support if you want to check it out and see what she's up to. So, okay. I hope you have a happy, scrappy week. Bye.